Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. This is the Standing Committee on Citizenship and Immigration, meeting number 37, Tuesday, December 1st, 2009. The Supplementary Estimates B, 2009-2010, votes 1A, 5B, 7B, 10B under Citizenship and Immigration, and the report on the operation of the Immigration and Refugee Protection Act for the year 2009. We have the Minister before us, the Honourable Jason Kenney, the Minister of Citizenship and Immigration and Multiculturalism, and his colleagues. And there's too many of them to introduce, so I'm going to let the Minister do that. So welcome, Minister Kenney, for coming once again to make your presentation to us and listen to our questions. And you have the floor, sir.
Well, thanks very much, Mr. Chairman and colleagues. It's great to be back. I'm joined today by our new Deputy, Neil Yates, our Director of Operations, Claudette Duchesne, our Director of ADM, for Policy and Policy, Les Linkletter, and Mark Waters, our Chief Financial Officer, who will answer any difficult questions about the estimates. I'm pleased today to place before the committee my department's supplementary estimates B for fiscal year 2009-10. These estimates include new funding requests of $127.1 million to increase departmental spending authorities to $1.56 billion for the 09-10 fiscal year. In particular, Mr. Chairman, this funding involves several key areas. Firstly, we request funding of $90 million to reinstate funding in this year related to the Canada-Ontario Immigration Agreement, which was initially reprofiled in the 2009-10 main estimates. This is funding related to settlement transfers, contributions rather, to settlement organizations, principally in Ontario. Secondly, we request funding of $32.5 million in 2009-10 to support the imposition of a visa requirement for Mexican citizens. L'augmentation des demandes d'asile et du taux d'infraction relative à l'immigration.
The increase in refugee claims and the immigration violation rate for Mexico has resulted in significant costs for the refugee determination system. This funding is to establish a new permanent infrastructure for temporary resident visa processing for visitors, temporary workers, and students.
In 09-10 to significantly reduce citizenship proof inventories and processing times. These investments should allow CIC to respond to concerns by clients and other government departments through a reduction in processing times. J'aimerais maintenant aborder certaines questions concernant la citoyenneté.
I'd like to continue my remarks by addressing some matters concerning citizenship and immigration that might be of particular interest to the committee.
Third report of the Auditor General. I wish to thank her for her review. We agree with her on the importance of a modern, efficient, and well-run immigration program, and we're considering her recommendations very carefully. I'm pleased to say that we have already begun making key improvements, and my officials have developed a plan to address the areas of concern identified by the Auditor General.
She's pointed out some administrative matters regarding temporary foreign workers, matters that we had already started to address through new regulations I introduced in October.
Our government has proposed regulations that allow for greater cooperation between my department, Human Resources and Skills Development Canada, as well as with the labour ministries in the provinces and territories who actually oversee and enforce labour market standards. Ces nouvelles dispositions nous aideront.
These changes, Mr. Chairman, will help us recognize bad employers and provide better oversight to minimize the chance of exploitation and abuse of foreign workers. Mr. Chairman, many employers tell me that they would go out of business if they couldn't find foreign workers, which is why we need the kind of tools and regulations that we are developing to protect workers and support our economy.
The program is constantly evolving to respond to Canada's changing economic goals. As the committee is aware, the ministerial instructions as part of our action plan for faster immigration are a key tool in that respect. I'd like to note that the government is addressing the AG's questions regarding the quality of analysis used to develop the ministerial instructions. They were developed after extensive consultations with both public and private stakeholders, including provinces and territories. Le ministre prend, deuxièmement, les mesures nécessaires pour tenir les
Second, the Department is taking the necessary steps to ensure that the instructions remain as up-to-date as possible. We're doing so by monitoring labour market trends, gathering information on changing national and regional employment needs, and we're closely monitoring the flow of new applications.
Have resulted in new applications in the federal skilled worker category being processed in 6 to 12 months, and a reduction of over 30% in backlog of federal skilled worker applications received prior to the reforms. These are major improvements. Going from 5 years on average to less than a year puts us back in the game and competing for the world's best and brightest. This is a substantial improvement, and the world is taking notice. To quote the CEO of Microsoft, the Canadian government is more welcoming of getting the best and the brightest from around the world than the U.S. government, for close quotes. As the committee is probably aware, Mr. Chairman, last month I introduced some significant changes to how newcomers become Canadian citizens. I'd like to take a few minutes to talk about them. I'm committed to ensuring that new Canadians understand the values, democratic institutions, and history that have made Canada one of the greatest countries in the world in which to live. C'est pourquoi j'étais très fier d'annoncer il y a 3 semaines.
That is why I was enormously proud 3 weeks ago to introduce a new study guide for those who wish to become new Canadian citizens.
Canada, the rights and responsibilities of citizenship is more reflective than was the previous edition of Canada's diversity, history, and values. It aims to make Canadian citizenship more meaningful by providing information that all Canadians should know and be proud of. Par exemple, nous reconnaissons l'histoire de la nouvelle.
For example, we recognize the history of New France, which goes back over 4 centuries in Quebec, and acknowledge the collaboration of French and Aboriginal people.
Of Chinese origin to building the country, acknowledging the injustice of the Chinese head tax, and note the government's apology for the same. We talk about the waves of refugees who came to Canada seeking our protection, people such as the Hungarians in 1956 and Vietnamese in the 1970s who fled communist oppression. We recognize Canada's leadership in fighting slavery, the movement of the Black Loyalists to Canada, and the contribution of abolitionists like Marianne Shadd. We also highlight a broad spectrum of successful Canadians, including Olympic swimmer and athlete Mark Tewksbury. Finally, let me note that I did not feel that the previous guide acknowledged that every year this country celebrates the contribution of over 1 million Canadians who served in our uniform in the past century, and the more than 110,000 who made the ultimate sacrifice to defend our freedoms. This needed to change. Compared to the previous edition, Mr. Chairman, Discover Canada aims to underscore the diversity of Canada and our traditions of pluralism, our tradition of unity in diversity. It emphasizes that new citizens inherit both rights and responsibilities, something that I think was insufficiently emphasized in the previous guide. En outre, le guide souligne l'importance.
It also emphasizes the importance for newcomers to Canada to integrate into our society and to learn one of our 2 official languages. Many newcomers, Mr. Chairman, have told me that they found the outgoing book somewhat insulting, that it underestimated their interest to learn about this country. I am confident that the new guide will help them to adapt more quickly and take advantage of the economic, social, and cultural opportunities that Canada has to offer.
No, Mr. Chairman, you hope committee members saw our announcement yesterday that I made with my colleague Diane Finley, Minister of HRSDC, which was the fruit of a lot of hard work, launched with the agreement that the Prime Minister arrived at with the provinces and territories in January of this year to create a pan-Canadian framework for the recognition of foreign credentials. And we made the announcement on the way forward as a result of a $50 million investment in the Economic Action Plan that will provide an agreement right across the country for common standards and a transparent pathway to credential recognition. Now, we can't do that all at once for all 40-plus licensed professions. We have to engage those who are prepared to work with us, and the initial list is 8 of such professions from coast to coast. Next year, we hope to roll it out to another 6, and I believe and hope it will pick up momentum. In those professions, we are now getting a guarantee from the provinces who will be working with the professional agencies that people who apply will be getting an answer within a year, rather than 2 years of evaluation and another 2 years of testing. We're going, I think, in many professions, from 4-year processing times to less than a year. It's not perfect. We cannot and never will guarantee anyone a yes answer, but I think finally we see strong cooperation between the federal and provincial and territorial governments to get some meaningful progress on the vexatious problem of credential recognition. So thank you for your time, Chairman. I look forward to the questions.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, or Mr. Minister, the foreign credentials issue is certainly an area that you need to be congratulated on. It's a difficult issue, and I'm sure there's many areas that need to be worked out. I'll bet you the committee has some questions. And the first round is led by Mr. Bevilacqua. Mr. Bevilacqua.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Minister, thank you for your comments. I'd also like to welcome the officials from the department. We appreciate, obviously, your work on, as public servants on this very important issue of immigration and citizenship. Minister, I read your comments, and every time I read, I recognize these words, by the way, when people reprofile funding. I wonder what that means. Essentially, it's polite name for money that actually wasn't used or was cut. But and that, of course, is related to your fourth sentence related to the Canada-Ontario immigration agreement. One of the concerns I have vis-a-vis is vis-a-vis the whole issue of immigration as it relates to immigrant settlement as well as language training is the amount of funding that actually lapsed. I think we all recognize in this committee that one of the major barriers for the integration of immigrants into Canadian society is, in fact, language. And there's 81 million that lapsed in that area, and 11 million, I believe, in the area related to aid settlement. We'd like an explanation for that, number one. Number two, Minister, if I may, this is not necessarily related to the estimates per se, but it is an issue that you and I have shared concerns over, and that is the refugee reform package that was promised a while ago, and we still have not seen the package, and we would like to give that particular issue the respect it does deserve when you have a staggering 62,000 backlog of refugee claims, and the system, everyone I think in this room agrees, is broken. I wonder what the story behind that is. Have you presented a package to Cabinet? Do you have, in fact, the support of the Prime Minister and the Minister of Finance for the funding required? And if yes, then when would we expect the package? And if no, then let's be honest with the Canadian people and say that that's just not part of the agenda.
Thank you for those substantive questions, as always, Mr. Bevilacqua. First of all, with respect to lapsed funds, I think we need to understand the magnitude of the increase in funding for settlement that came about in 2006 between COYA and subsequently the changes in budget 2006. We effectively about tripled the federal investment through my ministry in settlement services in the provinces other than Quebec. Quebec goes up on an automatic escalator, but the other provinces are now finally in rough parity in terms of per immigrant or per capita settlement funding with Quebec. So this involved tripling funding in a in 1 year, effectively, in the year starting in the year 2006. And you know, when you do something like that, you need to make sure that the money is being responsibly spent. Officials will tell you that they worked very hard with the settlement sector, the settlement agencies in Ontario in particular, where we have most immigrants, to ensure that those funds are responsibly invested. Earlier this year, it appeared that we were going to lapse $90 million in the Ontario portion of settlement funding simply because we couldn't find enough projects to fund that matched the terms and conditions and Treasury Board guidelines. I signaled to officials that we wanted to respect the terms and the spirit and the letter of COYA, And they worked very hard. I'd like to commend our officials for working very hard with the settlement sector to find ways to get these services out the door in ways that complied with the accounting rules of the government. And so initially we were going to take $90 million for this year, reprofile it into next year, not take it away, but just keep it on the table so it didn't lapse in the budget year, move it forward to next fiscal year. Because of the good work of our officials, we were able to actually invest those funds this year that will go into language training and other relevant programs this year. We're developing a system to make sure that goes forward without these blips in the future in terms of funding. Secondly, on refugee reform, I appreciate, I think, the very thoughtful approach you've taken on that. I think everyone recognizes that we need to make improvements to the system. And I can tell you, Mr. Chairman, obviously I'm not in any capacity to violate cabinet confidentialities or to discuss what may or may not be before cabinet, but I certainly can say that, as the Prime Minister indicated in September of this year, Canada and Parliament need to address this issue, and I'm confident that we will be doing so, both the government and the Parliament, in the fairly near future. I won't put a time frame on that, but our officials have been working very hard on this issue. It's something that involves, it's a very complicated piece. It involves, any kind of meaningful reform to the refugee system would involve statutory amendments, regulatory amendments, operational changes, CIC, CBSA, the IRB, etc. And so it's a complex area on which there are some very sound ideas about coming up with a balanced system that obviously respects our legal and humanitarian obligations while creating a more efficient system to provide faster protection for real refugees while disincentivizing abuse of the system.
So is there funding for this reform, or?
Well, again, Mr. Chairman, there is funding, of course, for the current asylum system. The IRB is fully funded, and in fact, I'm pleased to announce in that respect that as of today, the IRB is at 98% of its full occupancy in terms of government and council decision makers, and I anticipate will very shortly be at 100%. So the IRB itself currently is up at full speed. And in terms of any potential changes, I would just have to say we'll stay tuned.
Thank you. Monsieur Censure.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Minister, for coming before the committee today. I'd like to talk about the use of French in the IRB. This has been an issue for a while. I've been raising it with you for a while. And I'm still just as concerned as I always have been. There are more and more frequent cases, actually it even seems to be the rule in Montreal, where files of newcomers are opened up in English, systematically. Sometimes it's not even necessarily francophones or anglophones, it's just they're just being started in English. For francophiles even, their files are opened in French. And then evidence is produced in English before the courts. Government representatives want to go through the proceedings in English. And it's very difficult to have those proceedings in French. There is a case with Mr. Henfield, who asked on behalf of his client to proceed in French in one of those cases. In the end, the court accepted, but refused to provide translation of the evidence. At the time, I put a question to you on this, and you said, well, Mr. Saint-Cyr, I'm sorry, the court made that decision, and as a minister, I can't become involved. All very well. However, the problem is that this issue of using French before the tribunals has now seeped into the federal court. And the Minister of Citizenship is actually the defendant here. And I even have a brief presented by the Attorney General of Canada, and it says clearly that he is acting on behalf of the Minister of Citizenship. And then he goes on to cover his various points on his case on behalf of their client. And the issue of proceeding in French and obtaining documents in French is raised. Now, I put this question in House, and you said that the initial request had been made to have the proceedings in English. Well, that's not quite true. In the document submitted by the lawyers representing you, at no point in time is it stated that they want their proceedings in English. Perhaps there's the question put as to whether they speak English or not, but, Minister, I speak English. You know that. I've spoken to you in English, but that doesn't necessarily mean that my proceedings should be in English in a court. Those are two different things. So, what I would like to know is this. Given these instances, why does your department insist on this stance? And why not have those documents translated? Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And thank you, Mr. Saint-Cyr, for your concern and for raising that concern. And obviously, we share your support for the spirit and the letter of the Official Languages Act. And I have said to my department and agencies, including the board, we expect officers to comply with the Official Languages Act. Now, there is a case before the federal court, so I can't comment on details for the reasons you're perfectly aware of. I have talked about the original case before the IRB, where the English language was accepted from the very outset and actually was requested by the lawyer as the language of the proceedings at the very beginning of this case. And that was accepted. All those documents were accepted in English at that point in time. And so, therefore, it was the decision of the lawyer on behalf of their client, to accept all those documents in English at the time. So all those documents were provided. I believe that the board decided to change the proceedings language after a request on part of the lawyer, so that was changed. And then all those documents from that point on were provided in French. Now, perhaps this issue will be raised before the federal court, and so I cannot comment then. Well, then, you've already made comments in the House. And so I'm concerned about this. The government is spending taxpayers' money. Part of that money comes from Quebec. And I think that it's sort of a legal guerrilla war in a way on the part of the government. Your attorneys were not able to show before the court any document that shows that the person wanted their proceedings in English. The only thing that was presented, and here's the problem, I realize you don't want to comment on that case specifically, so let's speak about it in general terms. There was a form that had been filled in at the very beginning of the process by an officer, a board, that had been signed, and the immigration officer ticks off the box in English. But the problem is that in Montreal, those boxes are always ticked off. It doesn't matter who it is. It doesn't necessarily mean that that was the will of the client. So, should we not necessarily by default proceed in French in Montreal and that English be the exception rather than the rule? That's what the heart of the problem is. Well, I think that applies more to the Border Services Agency, not to my department. And I do agree with the principle that clients have their rights, and they have the right to be represented in the language of their choice. However, in specific cases, for example, should documents be translated or not, especially if they've been requested in a specific language, so with respect to whether that language should be changed at a different point in time, well, you have to ask yourself the question, what are the implications of that change? We may end up in a position where all those documents, in all cases, even say criminal cases, all those documents will have to be translated just because the lawyers all of a sudden decided that the proceedings have to be changed in French or in English. So what are the implications of that in terms of the whole legal system? So those are all issues.
Have Ms. Chow speak. I've spoken to her about her motions, and she has agreed to put the motions on Thursday so we can give our full attention to the minister. Ms. Chow, you have the floor.
Welcome to the committee again, Minister. The Auditor General last week said that the department has no strategic plan, no vision, made decisions without considering their cost, risk, potential impact on other programs and delivery impact. So we do have temporary foreign workers of 192,519 in Canada. We have fewer families coming in according to your 2010 targets. We have far fewer, half of the refugees going to be accepted in Canada. And since 2002, because the former Liberal government changed the point system, people that have low skills or manual labor, including the living caregivers, cannot come into Canada as permanent residents through the federal program. So they're coming in. We need low-skilled workers. There's no doubt about that. StatsCan tells you that. And yet they cannot come in as permanent residents. How are they coming in? They're coming in as temporary foreign workers. So how many do you expect foreign workers? Do you expect coming in this coming year, 2010? And that, let me read you one line that the auditor said. In our view, until CIC develops a clear vision of what each program is expected to contribute and evaluates the performance of its current programs, the department will not be able to demonstrate that its programming best meets the needs of the Canadian labour market. So to make it even worse, she said that there's no quality assurance framework to obtain assurance that decisions made by its visa officers are fair and consistent. So you couple with, if there's no plan, the assurance framework is not there, and then the third piece is these unscrupulous consultants out there telling people how to lie. You know, a small number of them, but they are they're criminals basically, and they are abusing the system, and yet the victims are the ones that get punished. They lose their money, they get deported, or they never make it here, or the families never arrive to Canada because of these unscrupulous consultants. And we had a concurrence motion last week where Parliament said, act. Please act. We are sick and tired of these consultants, unscrupulous consultants, not all of them, there's some of them. And it's right now, there's no regulations. They basically do whatever they can set up shop, they can do, and CSIC is not working, and we know that. And you've talked about taking action on this front, and when are you going to crack down on these criminals? Because they are just, well, a few. But we don't even know where they are, okay? So when are you going to take action? And how is the plan this coming year, 2010? How are you going to balance the need of the labour market and also Canada needing permanent residents? We need their kids here, not just their labourers. And your October changes deal with some of the abuse, but it does not deal with the core problem of the entire program. In fact, it makes it worse because You are letting them work 4 years, and then you say to them they cannot come back for 6 years. You should do that to the employers rather than the workers. So this is now reverse, and that means the temporary foreign workers have even less power.
Mr. Chairman, as always, for these insightful remarks by our colleague Ms. Chow. There is a plan, Chairman, a very clear plan to improve economic outcomes for newcomers and ensure that immigration is working for the Canadian economy. And I agree entirely with you, Ms. Chow, that that means we must maintain a robust stream of economic new permanent residents. We are doing just that. I don't think you give Canada enough credit in this respect. We are one of the only major developed countries in the world that is plowing ahead with ambitious targets for permanent residents in the midst of the global economic downturn. We are doing so because we think it's necessary to plan for the mid to long range, even though there is some softening in the labour market right now. But everything we've done is calibrated to improving economic outcomes for newcomers. That's why we brought in the action plan for faster immigration to focus on people whose skills are most in need on a national level in Canada. It's why we've increased processing times in that stream, federal skilled workers, from 5 years to less than 1 year. It's why we've worked with the provinces to expand the provincial nominee programs. Now, we get criticism from some that supposedly we're reducing the temporary foreign worker program, the federal skilled worker program. And people wrongly allege that we're giving up spaces in the federal skilled workers stream and moving them over to temporary foreign workers. As you know, that's ridiculous.
I didn't say that.
No, I know you didn't, but I was just getting this at a press conference yesterday from some people who might vote for your party. I'm just guessing.
Really?
And
tell me who they are. I'll go find them.
And these, but my point is, as you well know, I need to be clear about this. There is a permanent resident stream that we are protecting, that we are maintaining at 0.8% of population, the most ambitious level in the developed world. The temporary stream is entirely separate from that, and particularly,
that's huge.
Particularly the temporary foreign workers stream is responsive to demand. We do not plan, in fact, this year, we anticipated in 2009 to see a reduction in the number of visas issued to temporary foreign workers because of the slowdown, but in fact, demand was very strong, and even though in January HRSDC increased their requirement for advertising for Canadians to take up these positions. So the overall goal, improve economic outcomes. We've done that through the action plan for faster immigration. We've done it through the expansion of the provincial nominee programs. We've done it through the introduction of the Canadian Experience Class, the first new pathway to permanent residency in a generation that will allow some of those temporary foreign workers and many foreign students, yes, but many foreign students to become permanent residents in Canada. We've done it through our tripling of the federal investment in settlement and language training. All of these things together are combined to get better outcomes for newcomers, and also, of course, addressing the issue of credential recognition. But you've also raised the issue of consultants. I agree. This is an area that we must work on.
You know what? We'll have to carry on the next round.
We are working on it, and I'll get back to it in another question, I'm sure.
Mr. Dijkstra.
Oh, thank you, Chair. Thank you, Minister, for appearing here yet again. I know one of the issues that committees have faced in the past is the difficult schedule that a minister may have and not always being able to get to committee on a regular basis as a committee might like. You certainly, each and every time we make a request, you've been here, so thank you. Yeah. And yeah, I'm sure I'll take some flack for the work that I may or may not do at this committee, according to the opposition. But one of the areas, and I know the reason that you're here this morning, and I wasn't quite hearing it from folks across the table, was obviously the auditor's report. And one of the, while the opposition may have found a couple of things in there that we need to work on, which we have, and the ministry and you have agreed to, there are some positive components to that report, and one of them I want to build on yesterday's announcement regarding the Foreign Credential Recognition Program. And she certainly stated that it has increased awareness of foreign credential issues. We've obviously invested a lot of money over the last number of years, and I wondered if you could or one of the ministry officials could tell us about the different conditions in immigration source countries that might make processing a visa or immigration application more time-consuming here relative to other countries.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Certainly, you know, this ministry has the enormous challenge of operating what is, in relative terms, the largest immigration program in the developed world. And in that, and doing so with, I think, 64 offices abroad, in radically different circumstances. You know, from Buffalo in New York, where we have a large processing center, to Nairobi in East Africa, which services, I think, if I'm not mistaken, 18 countries, and in many of the war-torn, dangerous areas. And so there are significant variances in processing times, and I know the Auditor General points to this. It would be impossible to create consistent, identical processing times across all of our foreign missions. It takes enormously more time and human effort to, for instance, interview a client in one of the East African countries out of Nairobi than somebody who's immigrating from London and can take the tube down to our High Commission. So these are realities that we have to deal with. And I'd like perhaps to invite ADM Deschênes to supplement the answer.
Yeah. One of the other things that we've had historically is that we haven't had a filter to stop applications coming in. So, of course, every year we can process the number of applications we have in our annual levels. So the ministerial instructions are really a great tool for us because they will permit us to fine-tune, because a long part of the processing is cases that have to stay on a file until we can actually get to them. So if we can look at what the country needs and be able to decide how many we're going to take over a period of time, then we'll be able to adjust and not keep applications pending for a long time.
Claudette, I would like to welcome you back to the committee as well. I know it was a bit of a rough ride last time, but thank you very much for being back here again. Just to follow up on that, yesterday's announcement, which you mentioned in your remarks, Minister, this is going back to the throne speech in 2008, in which we talked about a stronger relationship with the provinces, with the territories, in terms of breaking down the barriers between provinces, and also the understanding that to compete in the international world, whether it be with the economy, whether it be with issues relating to trade, that in fact we need a pan-Canadian approach to this. And perhaps you could just outline in a little more detail what led to yesterday's announcements and the potential impact it's going to have on our foreign credential process.
Well, thank you. This, as I said, is a problem that has long vexed all governments. One basic fact that is frustrating to newcomers is that the federal government is principally responsible for selecting economic immigrants through the federal skilled worker program, based largely on their education, skills, and experience. Yet when they arrive here, the 20% of economic immigrants who fall within regulated professions often find themselves unable to get clear answers on their applications for credential recognition from one of the over 440 licensing bodies that exist across the 10 provinces. And we all know that this has led to the tragedy of the tragic joke in Canada of having the best educated cab drivers in the world, with this chronic underemployment. And I agree completely with Ms. Chow, Mr. Bivalacqua, and others who have raised this concern. We don't want to be bringing skilled people who are often from the top economic tier of their countries of origin to chronic underemployment in Canada. It's bad for them. It's a waste of talent. It's an opportunity cost for us, and that's why. First of all, in 2006, we created the Foreign Credential Referral Office with a $32 million budget to invest in helping people begin the process of accreditation before they even arrive in Canada, to cut down on the gap time upon arrival, which we are doing through the Canadian Immigration Integration Project, which will shortly be expanded and rolled out to additional missions. We're doing that through our Innovation Fund, for instance, providing these services in Korea and Taiwan, in addition to China, Philippines, and India. We are giving people an opportunity now, either through the internet or through those offices, to begin to make their application and to understand how they get their credentials recognized. Now, but more importantly, in January, the Prime Minister, for the first time, exercised federal political leadership on this vexatious issue and said to the 10 premiers, we've got to get this right. We are letting down too many newcomers. Let's come up with a pan-Canadian, a national approach to this. And remarkably, I never thought I'd see the day, but remarkably, he got all 10 premiers and 3 territorial leaders to sign off on an accord, to create a open labour market in Canada by, I think it's 2014, where there will be mutual recognition of professional credentials, and B, to come up with a framework to accelerate credential recognition for foreign trained professionals. That's what we announced yesterday. It was the consequence of a $50 million investment in the Economic Action Plan, and what we've announced is that we've identified with the 10 provinces 8 professional licensing professional agencies across the country, licensing bodies that include, for instance, engineers and pharmacists, amongst others. And what we're saying is that by the time the system starts in a year, people applying for recognition from one of those professional bodies will get an answer within a year.
Thank you. Mr. Karagianis.
Good morning, Minister. Minister, I got a number of questions that I will ask, and then you can take all your sweet time to answer them. Usually when I ask a question, you seem to want to eat into my 5 minutes. But anyway, so I'll take the opportunity to ask all the questions, and then you can go for it. Last week when we had Ms. Fraser here, she said, and I quote, "We found that Citizenship and Immigration Canada has made a number of key decisions without first properly assessing their costs and benefit risks and potential impact on the programs and delivery mechanisms. Some of these decisions have caused a significant shift in the types of workers being admitted to Canada. We saw little evidence of this shift in part of any well-defined strategy to best meet the needs of the Canadian labour market. In addition, we noted that the evaluation of the programs were audited were outdated and of lacking." Minister, since 2004, the skilled workers were 113,442 people coming in. In 2008, that shifted. The skilled workers went down to 103,736, and the temporary workers went up to 192,500. Now, farther on, when I asked Ms. Fraser if you were in a public industry, you were looking at numbers like this, and we were needing an audit, and she answered, "I wouldn't be too impressed by the planning, the strategic vision, and the potential consequences of all of this, the fact that there's no analysis to justify the changes and the shifts that are occurring, and no one seems to know whether this is the right thing to be doing."
Thanks. I was expecting more questions there. Thanks, Mr. Karagianis. First of all, I think it's important I think you just perhaps made the mistake I was alluding to before that some make, which is to confuse the slight reduction in intake in the federal skilled workers stream with the increase over the past 4 years in the temporary foreign worker stream. The two are unrelated. No, you made that comparison. We are receiving the same number of economic permanent residents. The spots that have the small reduction in the federal skilled workers stream has been has essentially moved over to the provincial nominee programs, which is another stream of permanent resident economic immigrants. And I think it's important to understand, I know my predecessors in various governments and various parties said for a long time, we've got to ensure that immigrants are settling right across the country, not just in 2 or 3 big cities. And the PNPs are allowing that to happen. I encourage you to invite to this committee the Immigration Minister of Manitoba or of Saskatchewan or of the Maritime Provinces, and let them talk to you about how important this PNP program is to attracting immigrants who are not just to settle in our 3 big cities.
Minister, what would the numbers be of the PNP programs?
Well,
Would
it
they
was
be about-
8,000 3 years ago, and this year we're targeting for 40,000. So it's an increase of fourfold.
Okay. Can you also, for this committee, tell us why the increase from 90,668 to 192,500 on temporary workers?
Well,
When
in
do we
fact,
have
in
that jump?
2005, when there was a previous government in place, Canada received 110,000 temporary foreign workers. Last year, that was
99,146.
last year that was a notch under 200,000. And the reality is that is a demand-based program where employers are unable to find a Canadian citizen or resident to work for them. They can apply for that program if they guarantee and demonstrate they're going to pay the prevailing Canadian regional wage rate and respect provincial labour market rules. And I didn't get a chance to respond to Ms. Chow's question, but we now have in place a monitoring system which will penalize employers who are abusive of the program.
Minister, to me, if I was looking at these numbers, I would say that there's a failure. We're not letting enough immigrants in, and we are justifying the positions that we need to fulfill by letting in temporary workers. We're letting in temporary workers. These people are coming over here. They're working 2 or 3 years, and after they're finished and their bosses don't need them anymore, they send them on their merry way. How are we building a country that way?
We're building a country, Mr. Chairman, with the most ambitious immigration program in the developed world, the largest relative intake of newcomers in the developed world. Now, I know a lot of Canadians thought it was counterintuitive that we should maintain these targets of 250,000 plus permanent residents in the midst of an economic downturn, but we did it because we believe in building this country through immigration. At the same time, there are a lot of jobs that not even new permanent residents are applying for. Just yesterday, down in the Byward Market, I was getting a bagel at a little shop owned by Chilean immigrants to Canada. They came here as refugees, and the owner, who I know, said to me, Mr. Kenny, I can't. My husband and I are going to lose our business because we're here 7 days a week, working full-time. I can't find any Canadians to come and work for me for $10 an hour. How do we access the temporary foreign worker program? That's a refugee to Canada who started a business, is an entrepreneur, and she can't find people who are willing to work here. So if she wants, she can apply for the temporary foreign worker program if she can demonstrate that Canadian permanent residents and citizens aren't working. I think the worst thing we could do in an economic downturn would be to turn off the motor of tens of thousands of businesses who are growing and succeeding because of a labour market shortage. I don't want to penalize employers because of a labour market shortage. And you know what? I understand there are problems with the temporary foreign worker program. It's why we responded with the regulations.
I've got to cut somebody off here.
Sorry,
so
sir.
I choose the minister. Madame Tilak or Monsieur Sensier?
Good morning, Minister. Good morning to your colleagues. I'd like to continue about skilled workers. So these are workers who come here. They have a specific employer. And I'd like to ask you a question on this. You've done market research, and you have checked to see if employers qualify to have those skilled workers. However, when we have workers who come here with a work permit, they are attached to a specific employer. And if that doesn't work out, because some come here who are specifically attached to that employer, but if that job doesn't work out, then there are certain timelines and that allow for that person to apply to another employer who will offer the same type of employment. But what that does is make their staff or the employer vulnerable. Let's take domestic workers, for example, or agricultural workers. So a refusal from the employer puts them in a vulnerable state. Because if that happens, they may have to wait several months before they're able to obtain another permit for the exact same of jobs, but elsewhere. So what can you do to assist workers who are in that vulnerable position? They don't necessarily have any family here to support them. Well, thank you for the question. I'm also concerned about this. And that is why we have worked with the Human Resources Department in order to speed up that processing time for work permits. I think it was 90 days. And now the average is more like 23 days to obtain that new work permit. Because it's true that sometimes that happens. People come, for example, as live-in caregivers, and the job that was offered no longer exists, for example. And so they have to find another job as soon as possible. And I'd like to ask Ms. Deschênes perhaps to elaborate on this. We are aware of those kinds of problems, especially in the context of a downturn in the economy. So we have changed our procedures to speed up the management of those cases for new employers. There are many examples that I could give you where we have worked very closely with the provinces, where there were several employees who were in a situation like that. In October last year, it took about 72 days, including mailing, etc. And now it's 23 days for the same kind of cases. So it's still quite a while, but we are aware of the situation and we're trying to speed that up. In cases, for example, for skilled workers, there was one case in my writing that took more than 11 years to solve. He was specialized in veterinary medicine. He came from Tunisia. He'd done his doctorate in Saint-Hyacinthe even. So it wasn't even someone here who came with credentials that had to be acknowledged or recognized. He actually did his studies here. But it was very complex. He had to go back to Tunisia and apply as a skilled worker. And during his studies, he had met his future spouse. He wanted to come here to work as a skilled worker, but after a few years, he got discouraged, and it's his spouse who had to sponsor him. He came anyway, but he didn't come as a skilled worker. He was sponsored by his spouse. And I wonder about cases like this. Canada and Quebec want skilled workers, supposedly, but there are many students who have done their studies here, and even they have difficulty after several years in qualifying as skilled workers. Even with graduate studies like a doctorate in veterinary medicine. I'm not familiar with the specific cases that have been raised. So I can look into that if you wish. However, I know that spousal sponsorship cases are a priority, and we deal with those cases in approximately 8 months. I know that's too long for many people, but the problem is that we're dealing with millions of cases. And so it's very difficult, given all the requests for people to come to Canada. Now, in terms of people in your riding, it may have to do with Quebec selection criteria or certificates. Do you want to add anything?
Young, please.
Thank you, Chair. Welcome, Minister, and Minister's senior staff as well. Thank you for being here today. Minister, I want to thank you, first of all, for what you've done with regards to the settlement funding, increasing the settlement funding. The Halton Multicultural Council do a fantastic job in Oakville of serving new Canadians in a whole range of areas. They've actually been able to expand their space. They're serving people, I think, in about 30 different languages. They do language training, computer training, and are just invaluable in helping people find new jobs. So it's making a huge difference in my riding, and I'd like to invite you on the record to visit Oakville if you can sometime and visit that site and see what's going on. The other thing is I want to congratulate you for yesterday's announcement. This is a problem with regards to foreign credentials that all of us in public life have seen for literally decades. It's been around with foreign professionals who come here and can't find a job in their area of expertise and end up driving cabs, etc. So this is a huge step forward, so I want to thank you for that as well. But my question is with regards to refugees. Now, as of yesterday, I understand the Immigration and Refugee Board is filled to 98% capacity, which is effectively, I guess, 100%. You're always going to have some turnover. Can you tell us about the new process of selecting and filling the board seats with qualified individuals?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. First of all, I did visit the Halton Multicultural Council for their Canada Day picnic celebration.
I remember that, yeah.
north of Oakville, and I would like to come back and actually see their operations. I personally benefit from seeing how the services are delivered. I'd like to go in and actually observe the language classes, etc., because it gives us a much more concrete, on-the-ground feeling of what good work these settlements agencies are doing. In terms of the Immigration and Refugee Board, as you know, we have been making aggressive progress on filling GIC appointment positions, and as of today, we are at 98% capacity. I believe there's 174 GIC positions, 165? 164 GIC positions, and we're just at about 100 and I think 60 positions filled, if I'm not mistaken. There'll be a press release coming out later today on that. So the IRB is operating, and I anticipate before Christmas that we'll be basically at 100%.
That's great. Minister, can you comment, because you talked about how you've addressed the problems that we've had in the refugee system. Can you talk a little bit about the economic impacts of the changes you've been able to make, and including potentially yesterday's announcement, the economic impacts on our economy, like how much in new revenues, what would be the value of getting, for example, foreign professionals in Canada faster and dealing with refugees more efficiently, et cetera?
Well, I've addressed the issue of foreign credential recognition, where we are making progress, but I want to be clear, there is no silver bullet on that. We are not going to magically resolve the problem, and everyone who's waiting for an answer now is not going to get one tomorrow, nor can we or ever will we be able to guarantee a yes answer for everyone who comes. We want to make sure that the doctors who are licensed are properly trained, that the engineers building bridges know what they're doing, and so we cannot guarantee 100% success for newcomers. And in fact, I've asked my ministry to make sure that applicants for our federal skilled worker program know that there is no guarantee that they will get a fast or positive decision on their credential recognition application, and that they're and I'm told that our visa officers often find when they tell people this, the response is, well, we'd like to take our chances anyway. We understand there's no guarantee and it might take time, but we'd still like to come to Canada and make an effort. In terms of the refugee asylum system, as I've mentioned, it's our intention to come forward with improvements to the system that will make it more balanced, to provide much faster protection for real victims of persecution and people facing risk in their countries of origin, while at the same time disincentivizing the fairly widespread abuse that we have seen. In the past 2 years, we've seen a 60% increase in the number of asylum claims made in Canada. Most other Western democracies have seen flat or reduction in the number of asylum applications. And with a 58% rejection rate at the IRB, whose acceptance rate, by the way, is about twice as high as in Britain or France, that indicates to me that there is a fairly significant degree of abuse, that there are. I know I get people criticizing me for saying this, but I'm going to tell the truth, which is that there are de facto immigrants who come to Canada through the back door of the asylum system. And we need to indicate to those people that is wrong. That's violating our laws and our generosity as a country.
No,
and it is my intention to address that issue in the near future.
Ms. Mendez, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Bonjour, Monsieur le Ministre, Madame, Messieurs. Merci beaucoup.
Good morning, Minister, and to your colleagues, and thank you for coming. And I'll repeat Mr. Dyktra's words, who has said that you're available to speak to us. And I actually was displeased yesterday to see that 3 ministers couldn't make it to my other committee, so I'm very pleased to see you here today. Now, if possible, I'd like to talk about the computer information. So, computer systems. This was a program that was started in 2000, and there were all kinds of failures and extra costs. And I think that in the 21st century, our department is lagging in terms of computer systems. And I am absolutely convinced that bringing it up to date is going to help us deal with these backlogs. Could you please tell us what is happening, what kind of deadlines you have? I think 2010 is when you're thinking of using some of these systems. Now, with respect to family reunification, I'm also quite concerned, and I'd like to have time to raise that if time permits. Well, thank you very much. Obviously, there have been many challenges with respect to case management systems. This was a project, I think, that began in 2002, 2003. It's been there for a while. And it was implemented in September 2004. We need these kinds of systems. If you go to our various missions and our offices, there are huge rooms full of paper files. It's ridiculous. So we need a much more efficient system, and that has to be computerized. And perhaps there's an environmental issue as well? Well, yes, of course, less trees are cut down. So our first phase for citizenship was implemented in September 2004, and it is used to process about 200,000 cases. And the next phase is currently under construction, and there will be an independent review, or was an independent review in June 2009. Could we perhaps have those results? Could we have a copy of those? Well, I don't see why not. Thank you. It's available under the Access to Information Act, but we can provide it to the committee. So there was an independent review that confirmed that our plans are doable and that our technological choices are well-founded. Now, on the issue of family reunification, globally we have kept our targets for permanent residents under the family reunification category. However, there has been a slight decrease for next year, mainly because we noted an increase in fraud, in sponsorship fraud, in some foreign missions. Up to 50% of the sponsorship requests, according to our officials, are fraudulent. Would you like to add anything to that? The levels are set on who will be coming to Canada. So we may have the same workload, but because our acceptance rate will be lower, we expect that less people will be coming, will need a visa to come to Canada. So that's why those levels are lower. Well, that's what I'm concerned about, actually, because the requests haven't gone down. Yes, but when you look at the acceptance rate, especially in Hong Kong, you see that the acceptance rate is much less than it was, lower than it was in the past because of the nature of the cases. There seems to be some sort of network that is being used to get people through the system.
For putting you out of order.
That's okay, Mr. Chair. Minister, thank you again, and your officials for being back before us. I too want to echo what Mr. Young said. The foreign credentials recognition. You know, I have the most. I represent part of the most ethnically diverse town in all of Canada, in Markham, and foreign credential recognition is an enormous issue, and it's something that I've been listening to governments talk about, even in my time as an assistant in the provincial government for a long time, and finally we're seeing some light at the end of the tunnel. So congratulations. Additionally, the new citizenship guide, I've had so many requests in my office for copies of the guide. I don't know how I'll ever keep up with all of the requests and all of the links that we've been sending out. A huge success. And finally, before I ask my question, the temporary foreign workers program. Do you know I have both an urban and a very important rural component in my riding, and I talk to my farmers all the time, and they tell me the same thing. They don't know how they would ever get their crops in the ground and back out if it wasn't for the temporary foreign workers program. And I'm blessed to see the workers in the fields throughout much of the summer, and so extraordinary work there. But I want to, in her report, the Auditor General outlined. She said that one of the big factors with respect to the growth in the backlog was, and she doesn't use these words, but when you get right down to it, was the change from one act to another act. When the act was changed back in 2000, she says that was a key factor in the growth of the inventory. And also, in addition, in 2003, when there was a reduction in the target levels for foreign skilled workers, that was also another key factor. I think there's obviously some lessons to be learned there in that how new legislative changes can have a huge impact on hundreds of thousands of people. And she went further on in the report to single out some of the work that had been done on the Canadian Experience class as a, in her words, or in their words, in our view, this is a good example of how programming decisions should be supported. So specifically, when it comes to the backlog, I wonder if you can, I guess more of a comment, if we can, obviously some planning will go into any future changes, but what are some of the actual direct things that are being done to ensure that we start seeing an even greater reduction in the backlog? I know we're going in the right direction, but if you can comment on some specifics that we're doing to address the backlog.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. As I've said to this committee before, the single biggest challenge that our ministry faces is managing what we call the various inventories, backlogs. When our government came to office in 2006, the overall immigration backlog was pushing up to 1 million cases. Let me say, first of all, that in the main stream of economic immigration, the federal skilled worker program, we've made enormous progress. The backlog had peaked at 635,000 cases, I believe, 640,000. And had we not taken action through the Action Plan for Faster Immigration involving the ministerial instructions and related operational changes, we would have seen that backlog for federal skilled workers grow to over 800,000 cases by now. And so processing times would have gone from the 5+ years, perhaps edging up over 6+ years. That was unacceptable. The system was on the brink of collapsing under its own weight. Something had to be done. And it was through amendments to IRPA and operational changes in addition to a $109 million incremental investment in Budget 2008. Thanks to those measures, we have now seen the backlog in the federal skilled worker program reduced by 32%, as latest figure I have, and processing, and people who are making applications as of February 2008 are now getting answers within a year. And I have to say, when I speak to immigration practitioners, lawyers, and people who follow this closely, they are delighted with the program, with how it's working. Now, the Auditor General has pointed to certain challenges, and we take her comments very seriously. She appeared to make her comments or projections assuming that we will maintain the 38 categories indefinitely into the future. In point of fact, we've always indicated that we will adjust the ministerial instructions for the occupational categories as necessary. And if that means that we need to refine the categories following consultation with the provinces and other stakeholders, we certainly will do so. And in fact, it's our intention to refine the ministerial instructions. That will help us to maintain the progress that we've made on backlog reduction for the skilled worker category.
Thank you. Ms. Graywall.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Minister, for coming to our committee.
Thank you.
Last week, the committee heard about CIC initiatives to address inefficiencies in the processing of applications abroad. And the Auditor General, she had high praise for the third-party language tests and the use of visa application centers. So can you tell us more about this?
Yes, about the language training?
Yeah.
Sorry. So, when we came to office, Ms. Grewal, in 2006, the provinces outside of Quebec were being, I think, massively underfunded in terms of settlement services, including language training. We have, one of the first things we did in the 2006 budget was effectively triple federal funding for settlement services to ensure successful integration of newcomers. We did this through the Canada-Ontario Immigration Agreement, specifically for contribution agreements with settlement agencies in Ontario. We did it through transfers to the provinces of BC and Manitoba, with whom we have devolution agreements, where they've delivered the services on our behalf. And we did it through direct federal services being provided in the 4 Atlantic provinces, plus Saskatchewan and Alberta. Quebec, of course, has its own system. And so this has been a huge increase in services. Like you can go, you and I visited PICS, Progressive Intercultural Services, which provides important range of settlement services, including language training to people in the Lower Mainland. They are doing so much more than they were a few years ago because of this. Look, we are ambitious for newcomers to succeed, and all of the available empirical data indicates that perhaps the single most important factor in the economic success of immigrants is language proficiency. Now, that's not to say that people with limited language abilities, English or French abilities, cannot succeed in Canada. We all know great success stories where that's been the case, but we are increasingly have a knowledge-based economy where people's success will be tied in part to their language abilities. This is why we have invested so much in helping people improve their language abilities. What concerns me is that only about 25% of eligible permanent residents actually enroll in the free English and French language classes that we are providing through the settlement agencies or the provinces. That's not good enough. We're ambitious for newcomers to succeed, and we want to encourage them to make every effort. Now, I know it's difficult. If you're working 2 survival jobs and your spouse is at home taking care of kids, it's not easy to go out and spend 2 hours in a language class. I understand that, which is why we're trying to find more innovative programs like the HIPPY program, which provides at-home integration counseling and language support to at-home parents, for example, like the voucher program pilot that we recently launched, which will send vouchers worth up to 500 hours of free language classes to randomly selected newcomers in Ontario, Alberta, and Nova Scotia to increase their knowledge of the availability of free language training and hopefully create a kind of positive competition for better hours, locations, and service within the settlement sector. That's the objective of the pilot program.
And Minister, do you have any ideas for improving our Canadian missions abroad?
For which?
For improving our Canadian missions abroad, do you have any ideas so that Canadian missions abroad can be improved?
Well, thank you. As I mentioned, through the Foreign Credential Referral Office and our $32 million investment, we opened up the Canadian Immigration Integration Project, partnering with the Canadian Association of Community Colleges, and they have been operating 2-day free seminars plus personalized counseling to selected federal skilled workers in Delhi, Manila, and Guangzhou, in Beijing. And we've also, through our innovation fund in the ministry, opened up offices partnering with groups like Success from Vancouver in Seoul, Korea, and Taipei, Taiwan. We will, as I mentioned, be expanding this program in the near future to include more people. Now, this isn't language training. This is pre-integration counseling, letting people know What does the job market look like where you hope to settle? What's the housing market? How do you find a job? Begin applying online. How do you begin the process of credential recognition?
Thank you.
How do you get a health card and get your kids enrolled in school? And I've met these people. They are getting a head start before they even arrive.
Thank you, Mr. Minister. Mr. McColman, thank you, and welcome to the committee.
Thank you, Chair.
You have the floor.
I appreciate it. And thank you, Minister, for being here. Although I'm a fill-in today, I'm going to take a little privilege and opportunity to ask you about a motion that I'm bringing to the House of Commons next Monday, and it's on the British home child. And when I heard your comments, your initial comments, and the new guide that your ministry is bringing out about Canada's history and values and diversity, can't help but think there's a real strong linkage here to the motion I'm bringing to declare 2010 the year of the British home child. And the British home child is part of our history that most Canadians don't know about, that touches many of our up to 12 to 14% of our population are descendants of British home children. And of course, there's in my mind, this is a great Canadian story of overcoming adversity that some of these individuals had come, and these individuals, there's over 100,000 British home children emigrated into this country from the late 1800s into the early 1930s, and they overcame diversity. They have made our country great. They served in the wars, both world wars, and it's part of our history that I think is hopefully will be told in the year 2010 as part of this motion that I'm bringing. And I really bring it to the committee today. I know you've been involved in this in terms of communication with my office and my staff and myself, and I'm just wondering what your overall views of such the motion is, and the contribution these British home children have made to make Canada great.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to commend our colleague, Mr. McColman, for welcome to the committee and commend him for his effort in this regard. The experience of the British home children was a significant part of building Canada. I believe something like 100,000 British home children arrived in this country between the 1880s and the early 1930s. And we know that while many of them had very positive experiences and had welcoming families and were able to have a future moving out of terrible poverty in Britain during that period, we also recognize that many of them experienced a very difficult treatment and, in some cases, abuse. And certainly we acknowledge that fact, and that's what you're helping to educate Canadians about, their contribution and their important role in our history. And I commend you for that. And certainly the government, as you know, for all parties, private members' motions and bills are free votes, but the Cabinet always votes taking a government position, and I'm pleased to inform you that the Cabinet has decided to support this motion because we think it's a great way of highlighting this remarkable period in our history. And this is joined with various other educational efforts supported by federal departments and agencies. For example, I understand that Canada Post intends, on the advice of their commemorative stamp advisory committee, to issue a special British home child stamp in 2010. I understand that Pier 21, the new Federal Museum of Immigration, has done exhibitions on their experience and will continue to, as has the Museum of Civilization across the river in Gatineau. And your motion, I think, will help to bring these different initiatives together at the federal level to raise awareness. And really, as you say, it corresponds to what we're trying to do in our new citizenship study guide, Discover Canada, which is to give people a better sense of our history. I just wanted to, I think Mr. Young was asking about how you get copies. We'll be getting printed copies. I'll be letting all MPs know shortly, asking them how many copies they want to order to distribute within their constituency offices or whatever. And if people would like to get their own copies, they can contact us online, or they can download it from our website at cic.gc.ca.
Thank you.
Thank you. That concludes the second round of questions, and the chairman has a brief question, and that has to do with the foreign credential issue that you announced yesterday, the wait times reduced for foreign credentials, and it was pointed out, as you have, sir, that $50 million has been set over 2 years to work with the levels of government to address this issue. My question has to do with when you're talking professional organizations, medical associations, law associations, those types of things, those are the associations that actually grade people who are going to join those particular organizations. So my question to you is, you've obviously had discussions with the provinces. Can you tell us what discussions you've had with the different associations across the country, and whether they will receive financial assistance as well?
Well, thanks, Chairman. I should point out that for several years we've had a foreign credential recognition program situated in the Ministry of Human Resources and Social Development Canada, and that is the program in the ministry which has been the interface with, on the federal side, with the licensing bodies. And Minister Finley has taken the lead on this issue, working with the provinces with particular intensity since the First Minister's Agreement in January of this year. So obviously we don't have a direct oversight role with respect to the 440-some licensing bodies in Canada. They are creatures of the provincial governments who, under the Constitution, of course, have exclusive jurisdiction in their domains for labour market regulation, including for the regulated professions. And so it's principally the provinces that have been the interlocutors. But some of the more, I would call them, perhaps the more progressive professional agencies have gotten into a dialogue with the federal government through HRSDC and the FCR program, and we've been able to identify, of the 40-plus regulated professions, which of them is more willing to knock down some of the barriers to credential recognition for newcomers. And that's the list of 8 that we announced yesterday are a pretty good indication of the ones who are willing to play ball. Now, there are some of the major professional agencies, let's make no bones about this, who are less willing to collaborate, less willing to streamline the process and cut the red tape and reduce the processing times. And I have to share the observation that some of them appear to be acting in a way to keep closed labour markets and to keep closed the doors of opportunity for foreign-trained professions, and that is a shame. And we are exercising political pressure, as are the provincial governments. Ontario, through its Fairness Commissioner, BC, through recent legislation, we are putting considerable pressure on those agencies not to reduce their standards, but to streamline the process. We can't, as I keep saying, can't guarantee everyone a yes answer, but we should offer them a clear and transparent and fairly brief process so they can get a yes or a no. I'll give you an example, the medical profession. Like here we have a profession where much in demand in Canada, and we have foreign-trained doctors who are clearly not getting licensed to practice. Not just foreign-trained doctors. I have a constituent who went down to Johns Hopkins, born in Canada, went down to Johns Hopkins Medical School in the States, got his MD, got his specialization, came back to Alberta, and he found it was going to take him a couple of years to be able to practice. He went back to the States. There are hundreds of cases like that. And so we hope that next year, in the second year of the Pan-Canadian Framework rollout, that the the relevant colleges and licensing bodies in the medical profession will come to the table and give us a streamlined process for maximum 1-year answer on applications to be licensed.
Thank you. Mr. Karagianis.
Thank you. Chair, when the minister was here last, back in May 10th, questions were put to him about persons coming into Canada. This was regarding Mr. Turkov, and he said, if a person is guilty of a crime, we have reasonable apprehension that he will commit a crime in Canada, then we can deny that person a visa. Minister went farther to say, if a visa officer believes that a reasonable likelihood that someone will commit a crime in Canada, then he will be denied a visa. If someone is guilty of a crime of a country of origin, we believe that they can commit a crime in Canada, that the visa officer is likely to deny a person a visa. Now, Minister, you said that back in May, and yet your officials allowed Mr. Sebastian CIMM to come to Canada when fully well you knew that this individual was going to have trouble. And I'm going to read you what's on Wikipedia, and I'm sure that Wikipedia is something that your officials can also do. Wikipedia says on October the 24th, 2008, CIMM was arrested after taking part in a rally condemning state atrocities against Tamils in Sri Lanka. So, Minister, why did your officials let the man in? Did they allow him in so you can have a big show and get him arrested and the whole 9 yards? Or was there still another failure that you let him in after you had let Mr. Tukaf Artawaf and he created the same thing?
Thanks, Chairman. I'm not familiar, and nor could I comment on the details of a particular case for reasons included in the Privacy Act, as you know, Mr. Karygiannis. But I will say that, restate that the Immigration and Refugee Protection Act renders inadmissible anyone who is or has belonged to an espionage organization, a terrorist organization, a criminal network, or anyone who has committed a serious crime abroad that would also be a crime in Canada. And the Canadian Border Services Agency do their very best to enforce those provisions.
Minister,
No, you can't interrupt the
Minister. In all due respect, Minister,
no, you can't interrupt. Mr. Karygiannis.
Your officials failed. They knew it and they let him in order to
Mr. Karygiannis, I'm going to talk through your time, and I'm going to ask Mr. Bevilacqua to ask questions.
Sorry.
Mr. Bevilacqua has a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First of all, I, on behalf of the Liberal Party, want to express to Mr. McCollum that we will be, in fact, supporting the British home child issue that you've raised. The second issue, Minister, in this committee, and I'm sure in your work as Minister, you're dealing with a lot of issues, whether it's foreign credentials, whether it's the various streams, language training, immigrant aid, settlement. But sometimes, as we deal with these specific issues, we forget the real big macro picture. And what is happening, unfortunately, with immigration in Canada, which is very different from immigration post-World War, is that you have immigrants that are overrepresented in the poverty rates of our country, in the unemployment rates of our country, and the underemployment rates of our country. And this issue is important for two reasons. Number one, of course, the immigrants are not fulfilling the so-called Canadian dream that they talk about abroad. And the other issue is that it's also bad for national interest, for our own national interest as a country. When individuals are not maximizing their potential, their human resources potential, it is very hard for a country to maximize its potential. And while we are dealing with immigration, I think as a very specific department, one of the concerns I have is that immigration is not a government-wide issue. And that is a concern, and it's been a concern for me for a long time. It's not just a recent issue. But I think it's kind of myopic and parochial to just think of it as your ministry. Is this going to change? Because I mean, I understand how important the refugee reform package is to you, for example, but I'm not so sure that the Minister of Finance and the Prime Minister have the same appreciation. And I'm being quite frank. Nor do I particularly believe that immigration and citizenship is viewed as a top-tier file. And I understand, I'm fully cognizant of the economic challenges we face. But immigration is one of the pillars of nation building, and I don't think it gets the respects it deserves.
Thank you, and Mr. Bevilacqua, we've certainly had this discussion and agree on the need to improve economic outcomes for newcomers, which is why we've brought in the action plan that is better aligning economic immigrant selection with our labor market needs. It's processing their applications faster. It's why we've expanded the provincial nominee programs, which typically includes prearranged employment for people who come to Canada, which certainly helps their immediate economic success. It's why we've tripled the funding for settlement services and language training. It's why we created the Canadian Experience class to allow pre-integrated, highly skilled temporary foreign workers and qualified foreign students to have a pathway to permanent residency. You get your larger point, absolutely. I would, however, challenge the assertion that this ministry is neglected or sidelined. In point of fact, if you go back and look at the Minister of Finance's 2006 budget, it clearly underscores that future labour market development, including immigration, is central to Canada's mid to long-term economic success. And that was the policy rationale for my colleague, the Minister of Finance, to increase by hundreds of millions of dollars the budget of this department to invest in settlement services. Like, that was real money. And as you know, budget making is about choices, and we chose the central agencies and the government chose to invest, and we are continuing to invest in these areas.
Thank you, Mr. Minister. Monsieur Saint-Cyr.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you. And I also wanted to point out that the Bloc Québec will also be supporting Mr. Coleman's motion, and I'm sure he will be pleased to know that one of the descendants of those home childs is actually a supporter of sovereignty in Quebec, Gilles Duceppe. Now, I'm coming back obviously to the issue of French. In our previous exchange, Minister, you said, well, we can't change the proceedings language right in the middle of the proceedings because then we'll end up having to translate all the documents and then there are all the costs that entail. True. However, in this case, at the very first opportunity, before the first hearing even took place, the lawyer asked for those proceedings to take place in French on behalf of his client. So from the very outset, when the client, or the defendant rather, was called to meet the officials, that material was in English. There was a form that was filled in, and the box was ticked off the way it usually is in Montreal. And so if you're saying that once that material is in English, it won't be translated, well, then there won't be any translation because it starts from the outset in English in Montreal. Now, you said earlier that this is an issue with public security, public safety. Well, perhaps you could talk to them then so that the officers use French as their default language. Now, at the very outset, if that's not early enough, then when can Francophone lawyers in Montreal make that request to proceed in French? Thank you for the question. I have visited the headquarters of my department in Montreal, and I believe 100% of the civil servants I met were Francophones who function entirely in French. And I can tell you that I have visited their various sites with Border Services Agency, and I visited the airport, and the services are provided in French. They're bilingual services. Now, if you're talking about a specific case where people have not been served in French throughout Canada, and in particular in Quebec, then tell me. Because that would be absolutely bizarre and it's unacceptable. I assure you that that's what we're here for. And the Official Languages Commissioner raised some very good points with Citizenship Canada on the Official Languages Act. So I understand the problem. Well, Mr. Kenny, I'm sorry, but the problem is that I have been telling you about this for months. I've been talking about this case before us where a lawyer from the very outset asked for the proceedings in French and had to really battle hard to get it, and the court refused to order translation into French. So I told you, not only did I tell you and did you not act, but your own lawyers continue to prevent this. and make it difficult for the lawyer and their client to have their documents in French. So there is a problem. There are immigration lawyers and experts who all tell me that when a case starts up at immigration, if that person doesn't speak French, it's immediately English by default, even if the person does not speak English, and that's the problem. Well, Mr. Chairman, it's my impression that in this particular case, the lawyer for the asylum seeker asked for the proceedings to take place in English from the outset, and therefore the documents were provided in English. That's how it works. That makes sense. And it's only later that they requested a change in language. I think the person was a Hispanophone, actually. And the choice was made at the very outset that English would be the language of the proceedings. And after that, that was changed for reasons I ignore. But at the end of the line, we have to make sure that all lawyers in our legal system do not use the Official Languages Act to end up changing back and forth and making sure the documents are translated back and forth in these languages. We need certain benchmarks. Well, the problem, actually...
Thank you. The Hong Kong rejection rate, as you mentioned, for spousal application is 50%. So are we saying that half of the spousal applications, these marriages, are fake marriages, that they are cheaters? Is there a consultant networks that are teaching people how to get married and and etc.? And what percentage of these cases are then overturned by the Immigration Appeal Board?
Well, I'll defer the question to Madame Duchesne, except to say globally, I think you know very well, Ms. Chow, that we do have a problem of marriages of convenience, commercialized fake marriages to get into Canada. I saw in India the wall of shame you've probably heard about, yep, with fake marriage photos.
50%?
Well, I'll let Madame Duchesne address that.
Okay, I would address it by saying it's a trend that we're starting to see, and the department is concerned that there's organized fraud around that movement. And so in terms of, what is the IAD doing and so on, we're just starting to look at that, but the great majority of cases of refusals at this moment are not proceeding to try to appeal. IAD. So, yeah. Okay. So we're looking at that. It's a new trend, but we are concerned that it's an organized movement.
Is the Prime Minister going to be addressing that when he's in Hong Kong? He'll be there in a few days. Never mind. It was just. What percentage of foreign credentials recognitions are actually done before the person arrives? Because I know that has been something we've been pushing for. We've been saying, get them recognized so that they don't get the training done, get all the paperwork done. Do you have that percentage?
Well, no, we don't, and that's part of the one of the objectives of the Pan-Canadian framework that was announced yesterday is to have better information, because obviously, the Nova Scotia dentists licensing body doesn't share with CIC their acceptance rate or when people applied. But within the Pan-Canadian framework, there will be much better information sharing. So hopefully, we'll be able to take a look in a couple of years' time and see what the acceptance rates and processing times are for the 440 licensing bodies across the country and how many of those folks applied from abroad. I can tell you that we have had some success. I don't think anybody is, I think very few people are likely getting their credentials recognized before they arrive in Canada, but I think we're starting to move the curve ahead by several months by encouraging people to apply before arrival.
One of the recommendations coming out from the committee is to provide some kind of financial incentives to the province, be it may, that so that they can offer internship for the doctors. Because if your friend from or your colleague, whichever from that U.S., even if he gets his credentials recognized, he still can't practice here. There's no internship.
Yeah.
But the hospital is saying that we don't have money to offer more internship, etc. Is there any kind of pilot project that you can move towards that area? And some of the small businesses or medium-sized businesses are saying that, hey, if you want us to mentor people, it takes us time and energy, and it takes a lot of work. You need to provide us with some kind of even be it a loan or something, so that they could, in fact, give the new employee the first Canadian experience.
Well, I agree. In global terms, internships, mentorships, apprenticeships are part of the way that we can help integrate people in the regulated professions to step up their skill levels to Canadian standards, or to get licensed. And I can tell you that in terms of providing bridge funding for skills upgrades, new permanent residents already qualify for some of the federally supported student financing programs, and I know Minister Finley is looking at ways that could perhaps be expanded. But I'm going to go off message here and say I personally think that the federal government, the public service, should emulate some of the progressive private sector employers, those that are partnering, for instance, with Triac in Toronto, in opening up opportunities for mentorship. I can tell you our own ministry has been very progressive in this respect with our student refugee program, where we brought in 20, I think, student refugees who were World Services Organization refugees to have internships in our ministry, and a number of them have now been hired on as full-scale members of the public service.
Mr. Dijkstra, thank you. Ms. Chow, Mr. Dijkstra.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I know that one of the things we've talked a little bit about here was the new study guide, Minister, and I know that through your office we're actually working hard this morning to make sure that each member of the committee has one before we leave today, so that you actually get a chance. One of the first, this one's warm, it's just hot off the press, so we'll make sure everyone gets one. The minister's office is the minister. He's doing everything he can to make sure we all have a copy before we leave this morning. So, wanted to thank you for that, Minister, and also give you the opportunity. I know a couple of my colleagues have a couple of questions. So, if for the sake of being able to get those questions out, if you could just address it. But with the fact that we have this document put together, you to be congratulated for the work, and your ministries to be congratulated for the work that they did on it. If you could just comment, maybe just for a minute, about the content and the intent over the next couple of months for distribution.
In terms of the content, look, the intent of this was part of our Citizenship Action Plan to invest a greater sense of meaning, of the importance of citizenship, and also to deepen the knowledge of the symbols, values, and institutions that are rooted in Canadian history, not just for new Canadians, but for all Canadians. I view the citizenship part of my mandate as being relevant to the native-born Canadian citizens and deepening for them an appreciation of Canadian citizenship. One of the things I've been most encouraged about in the response to this guide is the demands from schools and school boards and libraries to make this available to young native-born Canadians as well as new Canadians. I should also mention that it was designed following broad consultations with a blue ribbon panel of historians and thinkers and journalists and others from across the political, demographic, and geographic spectrum. And I'm very pleased to see the positive response that it's received. All MPs will be receiving a letter shortly asking them how many copies they'd like, within reason, I think. We can't break the bank in terms of printing. But I can tell you that the public demand has been amazing. I think in the first week we had 85,000 downloads or something from our website of this.
Well, I thought the interesting part of this, and I'll turn my time over to Mr. Callander and to Mr. Young, but I thought you made a really interesting comment. A bestseller in Canada is 20,000 copies, and our first print is going to be 500,000, so you'd have to argue this is one of the best sellers in history of Canada.
Okay. Mr. Callander.
Yeah, Minister, quickly, we've kind of strayed from the Auditor General's report, but the other day we were in front of a committee at Heritage, and as you know, my parents came to this country in the late 50s from Italy, and I was called Bush League by my NDP counterpart on that committee because I expressed my relatives, my uncles' feelings on this Italian apology bill that is currently before Parliament and how they disagree with it. I wonder. You made some really good points, but I wonder if you could comment briefly on the department's position with respect to the Italian apology, because it mirrors quite coincidentally with my own feelings on that.
Well, thanks. I did appear before Heritage Committee Chair on this last week, and I can reinforce that in 1990, former Prime Minister Mulroney made what he characterized as a full and unqualified apology on behalf of the people and government of Canada to Canadians of Italian origin for the injustices which occurred at the time of the internment of 632 Canadians of Italian origin between 1940 and 1943. In addition, our government has provided $5 million of specified funding under the Community Historic Recognition Program for projects involving education and commemoration of the Italian internment experience. Those funds will be dispersed based on the advice of a panel of eminent Canadians of Italian origin. And, you know, I find some of the politics on this a little unfortunate because previous governments had many opportunities to act on this and other issues of wartime internment or immigration restriction measures. They chose not to do so. Fine, that was their choice. But to then turn around and criticize our government for, actually, first of all, the Mulroney government for making the apology, and secondly, our government for providing real funds, $5 million of commemorative projects, is, I think, unfortunate.
Thank you, Mr. Kleiner. Ms. Mendez, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Merci beaucoup. J'aimerais.
Thank you. With your permission, Minister, I'd like to follow up on Mr. Bevilacqua tried to raise with respect to nation building. And I'd also like to follow up on some of your comments with respect that this affects all Canadians, not just newcomers. And I absolutely agree with you. I think often, actually, there is a lack of this amongst all Canadians. I think if all Canadians had to pass the citizenship test, they would all fail, or many of them would fail. So I absolutely agree that this should involve all Canadians. I would like to make a couple of points on some things that I feel are deficiencies in the study guide. For example, the Charter of Human Rights and Freedoms. I think it's important that that be included, and the fact that Canada was very involved in the establishment of the International Court. I think also the issue of responsibility to protect should be in there, because we were part of for example, the landmines agreement. So I think we have many things that we can be proud of, and that we should make many Canadians, other Canadians, aware of. Because I'm really discouraged sometimes to see to what point so many Canadians don't even know how Parliament works. They don't understand the difference between a federal parliament and provincial governments, legislative assemblies. So these are all deficiencies that I think could be addressed in that study guide for all citizens, not just for newcomers. So I'd just like to hear a few comments on your part. Well, that really was the goal, to increase awareness on part of all Canadians, of all origins, of our democratic system, democratic values, and origins, in a way that people can understand. You've noted certain points that you would like to see included. Now, I can tell you that the guide does refer to the importance of the Charter of Human Rights and Freedoms, and it does, on page 8, sum up some of the fundamental freedoms that you will find in the Charter. And on page 24, we refer to Canada's international role in several organizations, including the United Nations and peacekeeping, etc. So everyone has ideas of what could be added, and I understand that. But it was impossible to have a 100-page guide. We had to make choices in order to just restrict the thickness of the book. It's not an encyclopedia. So it's a summary. But if you have ideas, we're always open to ideas. There will be a review. Thank you. And I'm sharing my time with Mr. Karagianis.
Spousal partners and dependent children from African source countries, the waiting numbers have gone sky high. For example, in Accra, it went from 16 months from 18 months 2006 to 20 months, an increase of 11%. In Cairo, 57%. Nairobi, 92%. Pretoria, 20%. Rabat, 42%. Kingston, Jamaica, 75%. Port-au-Prince, 12%. That's for spousal.
We've
now,
got
when
about
it comes
30
to
seconds,
children,
Mr. Karagianis.
Accra is 29%. Nairobi is 73%. Pretoria is 114%. Kingston is 50%. Minister, you talked about a wall of shame. I'm just wondering if this is your wall of shame.
Well, Mr. Chairman, you know, since this member likes to politicize things, I think I'm required to point out that when the government of which he was a part took office in 1993, the overall inventories for immigration were well under 100,000. When they left office in 2006, it was up to nearly 1 million cases. And so the processing times that he talks about in any stream and in any mission are in part developed, or largely developed, under the government of which he was a part. So I'm not going to take that kind of politicization. Our officials do their very best in tough circumstances.
No, you've made the shot.
Your jurisdiction.
Thank you. You finished, Mr. Minister?
I'll just finish the sentence to say our officials do their very best in tough circumstances to maintain our goals in terms of acceptable processing times, and they're constantly innovating to improve processing.
Thank you. Monsieur Saint-Cyr.
Merci.
Thank you, Minister. If I put so much emphasis on language, it's because there's a very important message that we send to immigrants through government policy, and whether it be through your department or public safety, the message that is being sent is that when it comes to immigration, things happen in English. And French is the exception rather than the rule. Now, we were talking about the study guide. Well, I think that would have been a perfect opportunity to point out to newcomers that we have Bill 101 in Quebec and that they will have to send their children to school in French in Quebec. The House passed unanimously a motion that immigrants are expected to learn French in Quebec. And that would have been a perfect opportunity. Now, I think some paragraphs on the Queen could have been removed. I mean, I think there are a few too many. But I don't think we'll necessarily agree on that in committee. Perhaps we could speak more to it later. But I do have a question to follow up on fraud that was raised by missions and that showed that there are people abroad who are using fraudulent means to obtain their citizenship. Now, please correct me if I'm wrong, but no formal charges have been laid as far as I'm concerned, and the citizens I represent are wondering how come investigations with hidden cameras can be undertaken and yet no formal charges have been laid. Well, I can't comment on specific cases. I can tell the committee that the Border Services Agency and the RCMP are involved in investigations into fraud, citizenship fraud. Obviously, we're concerned about this, and that is why we're considering severe penalties for these fraudulent consultants who commit that type of fraud. The Bloc Québécois
because we have to vote on the estimates, and I'm going to close the discussion. I'm sorry. I'm sorry, but we're really running out of time. So the discussion has come to a close. Colleagues, shall vote 1B carry? Shall 5B carry? Shall 7B carry? Shall 106 carry?
10B.
I'm sorry. 10B carry? Yes, indeed. Shall I report the supplementary estimates B to the House? A question, a debate.
No,
Ms. Chow.
I just want to indicate.
I apologize, Ms. Chow.
Yeah, sorry, I've been waving. I just want to indicate my opposition to one vote,
Yes.
which is the one that is the $32 million towards the establishing visa offices in Mexico.
Okay. You're voicing your objection
Opposition
to
to that vote.
Yes.
The 32 million point five.
Did I see another handout, Madame Tylak? Was your hand up? No more hands. All right. Thank you. That's it, Ms. Chow. Thank you. Shall I report the supplementary estimates B to the House? On division, that's it. Thank you, Mr. Minister, and your colleagues for coming and talking to us. I know you'd like to talk some more, but the time, that's what happens when we have a great committee. We run out of time. Thank you very much.